students walk out in Virginia to protest Governor Youngkin's gender policies? And how did the media make Hurricane Ian political? All this and more on this episode of Happy Warriors. A big test of political leadership in Florida is hurricane crisis management. And we actually saw this some years ago with Rick Scott. And now the baton has been passed to Governor DeSantis. And in my opinion, he seems to be doing a pretty good job. He's breaking out his blue jeans. He's out of the suit. He's working to distribute supplies to needy residents on the west coast of Florida that got devastated by Hurricane Ian. But the media doesn't see it that way, right, Dominic? We saw the Palm Beach Post, a local columnist, said that Florida needs a new socialist slogan that's not "Don't tread on me." And he claims that DeSantis is a hypocrite because now he is asking for federal relief for the hurricane emergency. Do you think now he's a big government conservative and he's basically backtracking?
No. Storm relief is not socialism. That's not what that's for. Socialism is when you're trying to centrally plan an economy, something along those lines. When a storm comes in and the federal government has resources that are available for states to use, every governor is going to take advantage of that. That's part of why we have a federal government, for situations where we need a lot of resources very quickly in response to a very acute crisis, such as a hurricane. These kind of things are not going to bust the budget. The things that are driving our debt are entitlement programs more than anything, and this is a tiny drop in the bucket of the federal budget, and it's really something that the government should be doing, and one of the few things actually where it's a very acceptable situation for them to be spending.
Right. Well, let's hope that the federal government continues to collaborate with the state of Florida during this very terrible time. Now, Maddie, there was a recent incident in which Kamala Harris, the vice president, was speaking to actress Priyanka Chopra, and the subject of Hurricane Ian came up, and she suggested that relief funds and resources should be distributed on the basis of equity, prioritizing minorities, low-income communities, and people of color. She also mentioned that climate change must be to blame for all of this. What do you make of that?
Well, it just goes to show how much of a hardened ideologue she is, that even at a time of obvious crisis, where one normally rises above their politics, certainly the political differences, she feels the need to hammer home her usual ideological obsessions. Obviously, the point of emergency aid is that it's emergency, so it should be needs-based. It shouldn't be based on any sort of ideological premises. The people who should be prioritised are the people who need it most, the people whose homes have been completely destroyed, as opposed to people who maybe have had like window damage, for instance. That's the obvious thing. Race, social income status, apart from that, really doesn't have much to do with it. It should be needs-based in the context of an emergency. On the climate question, I think the left and certainly progressives tend to radically oversimplify this as a causal explanation for these disasters, and they do this because it's convenient for them to do so. We don't really know exactly the effect that climate change, as it's simplified and understood by many in the mainstream media, we don't really know the effect that it had in this particular instance. Certainly that shouldn't be the first thing we go to when we're talking about these things. I actually think that, to his credit, President Biden and Ron DeSantis have managed to put aside many of their differences in handling this hurricane. Biden was asked, how can you work with someone like this? And he said, look, this is an emergency. Governor DeSantis has been very professional, as have I. We're here to help. That's the point. And it's a rare moment in American political life these days where you can actually rise above that polarization. And I think that just harping on about climate change and whatever else is just, it's not rising to the occasion.
Right. It's nice that there's a moment of harmony, and it's awful to bring up such a subject when Fort Myers is currently submerged still, and I think it'll take a long time for that side of the state to recover from this. Moving on, Students have walked out across high schools in Virginia over Governor Youngkin's gender policies, which, in my opinion, basically empower parents to have a right to know and a right to intervene when children in schools are trying to undergo a gender transition. And from what I understand, this policy would basically require parental consent and knowledge if a teacher is asked by a student to refer to them by their preferred gender pronouns. Among other things, there's a bathroom provision separating the sexes. And Maddie, obviously this is your beat, and I'm sure you know a lot about it. What do you make of all that?
Well, the first thing to note is that it's a defensive measure. This is Governor Youngkin was rescinding his predecessors, his Democratic predecessors' policy, which was very aggressive in pushing a lot of this gender ideology into schools. So, as you say, there's a transparency issue with parents, there's an issue with age-appropriate materials, and there's an issue for safety and privacy for girls. This actually was very accommodating, Youngkin's policy, in that it allowed for case-by-case single stall options for students who do identify as transgender. The walkouts are just a case in point in how young people are very sensitive to what's fashionable, to peer pressure. The LGBT group is expanding massively with every generation as it becomes more and more popular. In fact, if you completely demonize being a white straight male, you will find some of them would rather opt out of that, and sexuality is obviously easier to opt into, or gender identity, than it is, for instance, race. You can't exactly do that. So I don't really take that very seriously. I think that's kids being kids, and they're very sensitive to what the cause is that everybody's getting behind. That's the explanation there. Obviously, it's a completely commonsensical policy. It's also a policy that it has and enjoys large support from the American public. Even people who might be pro same-sex marriage, people who might be very comfortable with transgenderism for adults, draw the line at kids for obvious reasons. Anyone who's spent any time around kids know that they're not capable of making these types of decisions. So
right.
I think it might look like bad politics with the immediate backlash, but it's good politics.
Well, I also read your editorial that heading into the midterms, Republicans seem to have the upper ground on transgenderism, especially in K through 12 and among children. And I think this might be a win for Youngkin and his state and the midterms generally, just like with DeSantis and the parental rights and education bill. I mean, there was the initial backlash, and then we learned it actually enjoyed widespread support among residents that, we should curtail the teaching of sexual education as well about gender identity for grades K through 3. But Dominic, on the walkout question, we see that this is, like Maddie said, a popular thing to do. Do you think maybe the schools would have treated this mass exodus from the classrooms in the middle of the day as kindly if there was a different issue on the table? I don't know, say Second Amendment?
Yeah, something tells me if they were going out and protesting in favor of gun rights, or what I'd like to see is a mass movement of students walking out for tort reform. I think that would be fun. But I think we all know clearly that this only goes for progressive issues where the teachers agree with the students on the politics, and it only goes for these kind of hot button, trendy social issues that the media like to play up as young people having some kind of special insight into, which they don't have. I think that these sort of movements, above all, they just prove that literally anything is better than sitting in the classroom, and any excuse that kids have to get out, even if it's just for a couple of minutes to protest some hot button issue, they're going to take advantage of that. And honestly, more power to them. But I don't think that we should be taking it seriously as any kind of indicator of widespread backlash.
So you're saying the students are just responding to incentives?
That's right.
If you're given one day a year to protest, this could be the day,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, last topic, sort of a more fun one, but there is a new conservative dating app called The Right Stuff. It was actually founded by the sister of former White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, as well as a former aide to President Trump. And the idea is that we have a dual economy now, and regular dating apps such as Tinder and Hinge and Bumble, well, they're not exactly welcoming to conservative users and people who are traditionally minded. They can't really find their match on a lot of these platforms. So why don't we make our own outlet? And while I'm personally sympathetic to that argument, I'm a more old-fashioned type of gal when it comes to dating and basically finding the right person for you. I think in-person, camaraderie and interaction and mutual friends and setups and, using a network of people to vouch for each other and screen each other before you actually, make the leap to embark on a relationship with them is much better than a kind of online way of doing it. And I'm skeptical of this kind of technology, period. I think dating apps have fueled a lot of hookup culture and hedonism, and I don't really think those are friends of conservative values. So I don't actually think this app, The Right Stuff, will have the intended result. What do you think, Dominic, about this idea of red coffee, blue coffee? Are we going to have red dating apps and blue dating apps? Should we?
Yeah. With dating apps, it's obviously not new to have different ones for different groups of people. We've had various ones for different religious groups, different there's the famous farmers only ads that we've all seen people make fun of and that sort of thing. So the idea of a conservative one is not exactly an innovation on that front. It's really just an extension of something we've already seen. And I think dating apps in general are an extension of something that we've already seen. There's an article that I read recently that talked about the difference between romantic love and marketable love, and how people are now, and how people are increasingly treating this as sort of a marketing proposition of what set of characteristics can I put together that will be attractive to the largest group of people. And the interesting thing is that article was written by Joan Didion in National Review in 1963.
Wow.
So this is not exactly a new phenomenon either. I think that dating apps are much more of a symptom of what's going on than they are a cause. And I think that it would help all of us to sort of reject that marketability impulse in dating and to try to focus more on that more personal connection.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And Maddie, what is your take?
Yeah, so agree with everything Dominic just said. I think there's also a practical consideration with dating apps, which is accountability. If you are set up by mutual friends, then you really have to treat that person with a certain amount of respect. Even if it doesn't work out, you want to be mindful of their feelings, because that could damage your reputation in the social group. And so there is an inbuilt accountability. Now you hear a lot of stories about ghosting or people being misled, used, discarded, all that kind of stuff. And I think that is just the danger with this setup. I think really we need to return to a courtship culture, and this is a much bigger problem and argument than the actual dating apps themselves. But I think that the problem at the moment is, first of all, dating apps sort of share the assumption of the sexual revolution, which is that men and women are essentially the same. They're essentially looking for the same things. And this is a great equalizer, because I know there's some apps where women initiate contact, but it takes both people to initiate this. I don't think that works. I think that really the ideal setup in any romantic culture is that men compete for the long-term commitment of women. What we've got just now is women competing for the short-term sexual interest of men. That works out very poorly for women. It also works out very poorly for men, in that I think men need women to civilize them, to grow up, basically. And they do that by assuming responsibilities, a wife, kids. and the best way of doing that is marriage. And so we need dating culture set up with marriage in mind. Dating websites, I don't think really are capable of doing that. You could have a sort of fiddler on the roof matchmaker who knows people who, but again, it should be sort of marriage minded. So I'm even more old school perhaps than you went with your argument. But,
maybe, yeah.
But so I think I'm not really a fan. But I mean, there's exceptions to every rule. I certainly know some people who have met their spouses on these things. So it can work, but I'm skeptical that it works for most people.
But I totally agree. I think the exception is not the rule in this case. And while there are success stories, I think maybe conservatives, instead of inventing a new technology to help facilitate meeting between conservatives, we should have social hours, and we should go to church gatherings after Mass, and we should really spend COVID basically killed so much of social outings and that really old school way of getting together and sharing ideas and camaraderie, and I think we really need to have a revival of some kind.
I think that's right. I actually, just thinking of an observation, I was out with a friend, and the bartender was at this bar was telling us that it's really strange because he'd been a bartender for like 20 years or something, and he said, 10 years ago you would watch men approach women and strike up conversation, like hitting on them basically. You don't see that anymore.
No.
You see people who are already on dates, met online, and then you see a group of women in one corner and a group of men in one corner, and they don't interact. Now, there's other reasons for this. Feminism, obviously, disincentivizing. The cost of rejection has gone up from like a transitory humiliation to potentially being accused of some horrendous
Me
crime.
too.
Yeah, so we've done a lot to discourage men from actually
We have.
taking initiative and
Right.
all the rest of it. But I think it does work. It does work best when men are pursuing women, and when women demand that the price of sex is
Yes.
long-term commitment,
Yes.
ideally marriage.
And I've found that even women who claim to be feminists, the most liberal women I know, deep down truly want to be wooed and pursued. They just are in denial, and they think that this is liberation and that they can take the reins and take charge, but in reality, they're deeply dissatisfied when they have their way.
Yeah.
And it's really like it's sad when you see a situation like a bar and a man is not taking not being proactive.
Yeah. It's
about
also not sustainable for civilization because we need men and women to get along,
Right.
to produce and
right.
raise the next generation. So.
Yes. There's too much skepticism between the sexes, and I think dating apps have unfortunately fueled that. Thanks for watching this episode of Happy Warriors. For more content on DeSantis drama, check out our last video on the migrant flights to Martha's Vineyard.